Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday 23rd of January 2023. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Tallowa people and pay respect to Tasmania's Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Joining me this afternoon are my fellow Planning Authority members, Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Russell Yaxley, Alderman Harry Quick and Alderman Josh Cockshut. We have apologies this afternoon from Alderman Jan Dunsby. The Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of council. We have fairly simple meeting procedures this afternoon. Our planning officer will present their assessment and recommendation and then answer any questions that planning authority members may have. I will then invite the applicant and any interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting if they wish. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes each. I then may ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised by either the applicant or the representatives. The planning authority will then discuss the application. For statutory planning applications, the planning authority will then decide the application and our senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. And for planning scheme amendments, our strategic planner will explain the decisions being made by the planning authority and then the Tasmanian Planning Commission. When deciding an application, the planning authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, to consider representations received during the public notification period, to make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are pretty simple as well. We just ask that you comply with any directions given by the chairperson and please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. I also note that our planning authority meeting is being recorded and live streamed to our council Facebook page, and anyone who speaks to addresses the authority tonight will be included in that live stream. We also have obviously a number of planning staff joining us tonight, so we couldn't do our meeting without them. So welcome to our planning officers and our environmental health officers and other officers joining us here this afternoon. So I've done the Planning Authority Declaration, which is item 1 on our agenda, and apologies so moving on to item 3, pecuniary interest. Do any authority members or staff have any pecuniary interest to declare this afternoon? None. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, then confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 5th of December 2022 be confirmed? Moved Alderman King, seconded Alderman Cockshut. Any discussion of the minutes?
No, thanks, Mayor.
No discussion? Happy for me to put it to the vote, Alderman King?
I am.
I'll put it to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 5, proposed use and development, 16 lot subdivision, 15 lots plus balance at 91 Mary's Hope Road and 16 Basque Place and 26 Basque Place, Rosetta. Our planning officer presenting this one is Sylvia Jeffries, is that right?
Correct.
Yep, we have Sylvia
Yes.
online.
Yes,
Okay, welcome Sylvia, over to you.
thank you, Chair. Can we have the first slide, please?
Might just see if we can turn the volume down a little bit too.
So the subject property is a large property at 91 Mary's Hope Road that's made up of 4 titles and includes the summit of Oak Hill. You can see the whole of the property on the left-hand side. However, the development area is on a triangular portion of the land of approximately 3 hectares on the northeast with access from Apollo Road. So on the right-hand side, that slide focuses more on the area of the development. The property in Basque Road is only involved because there's a service connection on it. There's no development proposed for that property. The subject site also has frontage to Mary's Hope Road and to Islington Road. You can see that on either end of the point of the triangle. And could we have the next slide, please, for the signing? So this application is actually assessed under the Glenorchy Interim Scheme 2015 because the application was valid before the new planning scheme came into effect. So 3 signs apply to the proposal, and the proposal is considered to accord with the intent of each sign. So most of the proposal is within the low density residential zone. You can see that in the form of a pink triangle, and I've written over the top what the zoning is. The purpose of the zone is to provide for residential development where there are some constraints. In this case, the proposal is for larger lots on steep land. Then lot 1 is, and part of lot 15 are within the general residential zone. That's the part of the land that adjoins Mary's Hope Road. But only lot 1 is assessed under the provisions of this zone because most of that lot is within the zone, while lot 15, only a small part of it is within that zone. So the purpose of the general residential zone is to provide for residential development on serviced land. So the service connections in Mary's Hope Road for lot 1. Then the third zone only really affects the balanced lot, and that's the green zone or the turquoise zone. That's the environmental management zone. That applies to the balance, and it does, however, include a building area. And also it applies to the access strip at the end of the triangle for lot 13 that goes to Islington Road. That's a very small part of that lot that's within the environmental management zone. But however, the building area, it's noted, is actually going to be situated within a cleared area within that zone, and the access strip would require minimal vegetation clearance, and so it's considered that the development also complies with the environmental management zone. We have the next slide, please. So this slide shows the plan for the subdivision. You can see that it's for 15 lot subdivision plus balance, and it does include a new road from Apollo Road. So you can see that most of the lots are within that triangle section, and like I said, it extends to Mary's Hope Road and to Islington Road. It's also noted that there is an easement on the southern side for bushfire management, which is within the subject lots, but they'll be outside the building area for those lots. On the eastern side, we have an easement for power lines, and that is also going to be doubling for bushfire protection as well. That is actually external to the subdivision. And then as part of the balance lot, it's proposed to adhere to of the titles, so that there'll be only one title for the balance lot. But there's no development other than proposed building area for the balance lot. And so the lots, they vary in size between 1,002 square meters and 2,492 square meters, and there's 2 internal lots as well, and the building area, like I said. So we go to the side photos, please. So this shows where the access road will go between the houses from Apollo Road, sort of that grassy vegetated bit where we'll go up. Then the photo on the right-hand side is looking east, so that sort of those houses that are there, they're fronting Apollo Road. So that's behind Apollo Road, what you can see there. Next slide, please. So this is just looking to the south. When you get up from again, those houses are in Apollo Road that you can see there, and that's looking towards Islington Street. The next slide, please. So this is looking to the north. Well, not quite towards Mary's Hope Road, but if you go on long enough, that will be to Mary's Hope Road. Again, the house that you can see is in Apollo Street. Next slide, please. So this shows on the left-hand side, that shows the access of Mary's Hope Road. That's where the power lines are as well. And at the moment, that is reasonably vegetated, that lot, but it will have access of Mary's Hope Road. So I imagine it has to be probably going sort of next door to where the existing house is. That's on the block next door. Then the photo on the right-hand side, that shows the access of Islington Road. So if you're looking all the way to the top of the hill, you can see tiny little tree in the gap. That's not quite where the start of the lot is. So the forest that you can see, that will all stay where it is. So the access road will sort of go over the ridge of where you can see now, and that's where that lot will be. The next slide, please. So there's various discretions, and mainly to do with the lot design, and because development is in 3 different zones, the provisions of 3 different zones apply. So for lot number 1, there's actually, under the old planning scheme, there's a maximum size, which is 1,000 square meters for lot size. And then there's also the slope and where the codes apply and whether it complies with the frontage. So for lot 1, it is bigger than 1,000 square meters, but considering it's a steep side, it's considered appropriate that lot is a little bit bigger. Again, the slope exceeds 1 in 5, like all the other lots in the other zone as well, but it's considered because of the size of the lot, there's enough room to situate the house. In terms of the codes, there are 2 codes that apply, but that be addressed separately under the codes, and they're not really impeding the building area of that lot. Then in terms of lot design within the low density residential zone, again, there are building areas required of 20 meters times 20. 9 lots have the required area, and some of the other lots don't. However, in terms of the building area, it was still considered that there's a reasonable prospect of putting a house within the building area that's shown on the plan for each lot, because some of the lots are either deeper or they're wider than the 20 meters. So it's considered was, or they might have a corner missing on the 20 times 20 rectangle or something like that. But it's considered in general that the lots are actually big enough to have a reasonable prospect of putting a house on there and complying with the setbacks as well. So the building area actually has to make enough allowance for all the setbacks as well, and for any areas that might be affected by a code as well. So it's considered that the lots are reasonable, the building areas, to be able to put a house on there. Again, the slope is also an issue with the building design. So the slope is more, again, in the acceptable standard is 1 in 5, but those lots are actually steeper. But again, it's considered that there is a reasonable prospect of being able to put a house on there. In some of the lots that are steeper, there are driveways proposed as part of the subdivision to give them proper access because of the steepness, to overcome that problem. And then also some of the lots are discretionary for frontage. Again, frontage is meant to be 30 meters, but the objective is that there's reasonable access, prospect of vehicular access, and all of the lots can comply with that intent. So it's considered that the proposed frontages are, which are between 16.5 and 26.5 metres, are reasonable. So yes, all of the lots are capable of accommodating a reasonable residential development and vehicular access. The application is also discretionary because it includes a new road, but that was assessed by the development engineer and she was happy with the road, so it's considered that's okay. It's also discretionary because the subdivision doesn't provide private open space, but the property department recommended that a condition is imposed for cash in lieu, so that would satisfy the performance criteria for that standard. Then another discretion in terms of the services, again, that was looked at by development engineering and that is acceptable. In terms of codes, we have two codes. We've got the low landslide risk, and again, that was assessed by engineering. The applicant had to provide a geotech report to demonstrate that the proposed building areas on the lots will be capable to accommodate a house, and so that the risk was acceptable in terms of landslide. The other code is the biodiversity code. That applies mainly to the building area on the balanced lot, and it applies to the bushfire management area for lots 1 to 5, which is basically under the power lines. Again, a natural values assessment was submitted, and it was found that the relevant vegetation was in relatively poor condition, and that the main part of the forest, that is the important bit, that would stay intact because that's outside the subdivision and that would remain and won't be affected by any of the subdivision works. And also it's noted that the building area on the balanced lot is actually within a cleared area and it doesn't require extra clearing either for the bushfire protection. So it was considered that the relevant objectives of the biodiversity code were also satisfied. Then the last three discretions are in terms of engineering. That was a traffic increase. Again, a traffic impact assessment was submitted and it was found acceptable in terms of traffic generation. Then there was an issue of sight distance, which also was considered acceptable for the sort of speed that will be happening on that road. And then also stormwater infrastructure is always discretionary, but also that was considered acceptable. But I'm sure the development engineer can answer any questions in regards to that. So the application was like normal, advertised for a fortnight, and the council received 2 representations. One of the representations was querying what the density of dwellings would be. So at this point, there are no dwellings proposed. It's only the subdivision. However, because they're in the low density zone, only 1 dwelling per 1,500 square meters could be had under the provisions of today's planning scheme. And that means all of the lots except lot 1 could only have 1 dwelling on them. So it wouldn't be very dense at all. Then the issue of vegetation and wildlife was raised. Again, the subject land is within the residential zone. However, most of the land is actually clear where the subdivision is going, except where I was mentioning that part for the bushfire protection. And the adjacent land is zoned environmental management, and that will offer protection to the wildlife and all that forest on the hill. So it was considered that that complies. Another issue that was raised were vehicular lights from the driveway of lot 12, that they might affect one of the adjacent residential properties. That is not actually something that's catered for under the planning scheme. So there's no standard for that. So I guess it's no different to any other driveway in any other kind of urban development. And I guess maybe landscaping or something like that could prevent that if that becomes an issue. But we can't do anything about it under the planning scheme. Another thing that was mentioned was the landslip hazard area. And like I said earlier, we have received that there's an issue that's considered under the planning scheme. And we have received the geotechnical report that found that the proposal was satisfactory in terms of those issues. So that has been looked at. Again, water runoff apparently is an issue up there at the moment on the land, but there are things that the developer will have to do to contain any water runoff, and there are strict conditions for dealing with stormwater, so that issue should be taken care of adequately. And also stormwater drainage was raised as well. And again, that our hydraulics engineer had to look at that, and also the developer had to put in a hydraulics plan and explain how they're going to deal with all the stormwater and that. And there's quite a lot of conditions recommended on the planning permit to deal with all of that. So it's considered that those issues have been looked at adequately, and that shouldn't become a problem as a result of the subdivision. So overall, the proposal is considered acceptable, and there's quite a lot of conditions. So there's special condition in terms of planning for cash in lieu for open space. There will be also Part 5 agreement necessary to be put in before the final plan for bushfire hazard management areas that are external to the subdivision land. And also we're requesting a weed management plan just to make sure that weeds don't escape to the special areas within the environmental management zone. So like I said, overall, the proposal is assessed as compliant with the planning scheme, and it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sylvia. Very comprehensive assessment there and presentation. Thank you. We do have one of the neighbouring residents here, Margot. You mentioned before you didn't want to address the authority, though. I just want to check you don't want to address the authority tonight?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit
Oh, that's okay. I just said now, if you do want to address the authority, now's your opportunity, but you don't have to, no pressure.
No, I don't want to.
That's okay, no problem. Thank you. And we do have one of the applicants, Mr. Swan, here. Would you like to address the authority at all, Mr. Swan?
No, not at the stage, no.
Unless there's any questions.
If there's any questions? Okay.
Oh, Mr. Swan, you mean?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So we do have obviously recommendations before us, but before we get to that, do authority members have any questions for Sylvia at this stage? Alderman King.
Thank you, Chair. Sylvia, at this stage, all we're approving is a subdivision, not building. So that's a whole new process again, isn't it? Just for those that are here's information. Is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the question properly.
Okay. At this stage, all we're looking to approve is a subdivision, not any building approval. So
Yes, it's only the subdivision and there is building areas where they're supposed to put the buildings on it, but there's no buildings proposed at this stage, no.
So in essence, it could go to the next stage and building may or may not be approved. That's what people need to be aware of.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks. And the cash in lieu, is that a commercial in confidence at this stage, or are we allowed to talk about that? Is that?
Well, I don't know what the amount is, but it's I think it's 5%. I'll have to have a look in the relevant section of the report. Yep. I think it's in the condition. I think it's 5% of. No, actually, I don't know what the amount is, but there's usually evaluations got to come in when they submit the final plan. They have to get a valuation done, and it's 5% of that.
Is it 5% of the undeveloped lot or the developed lot? The undeveloped lot, yeah. Yes.
Undeveloped lot.
So as it sits, yeah, 5% of as it is presently. Yeah, rustle up there, we've got to get it punched up a bit.
5% of the unimproved value of the whole area as shown on the plan of subdivision.
Yep. And again, well presented, Sylvia. There are a lot of conditions here, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for Sylvia? Alderman Yaxley.
Through you, Mayor. I think again, very comprehensive report and breakdown of everything. Just a question on, I think it's the condition 24. Let me just find it just to double check. Where it basically asks that upon request that the geotechnical report is provided. I was just wondering what's the reason behind that, and whether obviously with potential people that aren't confident, or maybe their first time in buying a piece of land, is that something that should be made mandatory rather than just upon request?
The development engineer will have to answer that.
Hi, this is Bree, Development Engineer. Just bear with me 1 sec. I'm trying to locate that condition 24, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's on page 51, Bree. I know condition 25 is that a covenant to which council is to be made party shall be placed on the title of all proposed lots to the effect that no development shall take place on the said land except in accordance with the recommendations contained in the geotechnical report. So I would expect if you were purchasing a piece of land or a property and it had a covenant on it, you'd probably be prompted to ask for the report. But
my only thought was being in that low landslip based area, that it's not something that they might not potentially know that's available. So whether it was basically mandatory that technical report was made available, so they had the confidence when purchasing. So yeah, that was my only thought.
That's that's a standard sort of requirement, but that's not for this stage.
Okay.
Really, it's for the building stage.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and so my only other concern was about the low landslip area, but obviously that's just a concern. But based upon the reports and things, I think everything looks like it's been done very well, and we've just got to trust the process of that. So yeah, that's my only questions.
thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Further to the question Alderman Yaxley asked about that report being made available upon request, Bree, just to clarify, when you said there it's at the next stage, so will that be a condition again on any development application that comes forward for actual development of property on the land?
It will be a covenant on the title of each new lot once it's completed, once the final plan's approved. So it won't be the condition, but it will be some sort of like, if you like, terms or caveat in the title for each lot, where new lot may be subject to the geotech overlay or bushfire hazard overlay and flood, for example. So there are certain steps once prior to building the dwellings. If that's answer the questions, or?
Yeah, I think so. I guess it's just that thing about upon request rather than there's probably nothing in legislation that gives us the power to say that it must be mandatory. But as I say, where there's a covenant, if you saw a covenant and you were purchasing a property, your solicitor would probably recommend, wouldn't they, that you get a copy of the report?
Yep.
You would hope so. Yeah.
Can we ask a question?
Yes.
She is referring to the existing geotech report, isn't she?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So the existing geotechnical report is from November 2020. Is that right, Bree?
That's correct, yes. So the geotech report sort of assess and study the site, and they have some sort of recommendations for the foundations. Yeah.
Yep. So further to that, should it be like 5 years down the track or 10 years down the track? That covenant obviously exists for the life of in forever, ongoing. I guess there's never any requirement to get another geotechnical assessment then, so it's always referring to the November 2020 geotechnical assessment?
That's my understanding, yes. Unless there is like a new updated report or assessment done.
Yep. I guess any prospective purchaser could get one done if they were concerned about change,
Should
couldn't
get
they?
one done.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, thank you, Bree. Any further questions from authority members on this particular application? No further questions? Nothing further from you, guys?
That's all good.
No? Oh, good. I had a question actually about the zoning. So, I know we've talked about the zoning being low density. Should the applicant want to develop more or higher density on the land, I assume they would have to work with council to seek to rezone land. Is that right?
Through you, Chair.
Yes, under the current zoning, they wouldn't be able to because of the provisions. Yeah, they would need to make an application for rezoning, but I don't know. The reason it is zoned low density is because they are steep lots, and yes, I think that'd be probably quite unlikely that would happen.
Right, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Now, no other questions? No. And then we have a recommendation for approval, and we do note that there were 2 representations received and that Sylvia has addressed the issues raised in those representations, and we as a planning authority have received those representations in full with the identity of the representors redacted. So we have a recommendation for approval that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 91 Mary's Hope Road, Rosetta, subject to 55 conditions that are outlined in our recommendation there. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Moved Alderman Cockshott, someone to second, Alderman Yaxley. Alderman Cockshott, would you like to speak to?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's been a comprehensive report. I think all the conditions are met, and there's been some good discussion so far. And like Alderman King said, we're just approving the subdivision, not actual development on the land. So I think at this stage, all things considered, I think it's good to proceed with the plan ahead.
Thank you, Alderman Cockshott. Any further discussion? No. I too appreciate the thorough and comprehensive report that's been presented to us, and I'm satisfied that the 15 discretions that we've talked through has demonstrated that they are in accordance with the planning scheme. We know that we have a great need for housing in our municipality, and we in Glenorchy have very little greenfield land left, so it's really great to see developers coming forward, working with council to seek to subdivide some of that little land that is left to be used for residential purposes for increasing housing in our municipality. So I'm very supportive of the proposed subdivision and would implore my fellow planning authority members to support it. There's no further discussion. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Cockshott.
No further comments, thank you.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote, or the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, the process from here is that the application has been approved by the Glenorchy Planning Authority. Copies of the permit will be issued to the applicant and to the representors. Either the representors or the applicant have an ability to appeal to the Tasmanian Administrative and Civil Tribunal if they're dissatisfied with the outcome. If that does not occur, the permit would be valid after a period of 14 days.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6, proposed use and development. Multiple dwellings, 28 new and 1 existing in stages, including service connection at 210 Ironbark Drive, with subdivision for a new road lot and construction of a new cul-de-sac at 19 Lesdale Street, 18 Lesdale Street, 29 Lesdale Street and 210 Ironbark Drive, Claremont. And our planning officer is again Sylvia. So over to you, Sylvia, to present this one to us.
Thank you, Chair. We have the first slide, please. The subject site, the principal site is 19 Lesdale Street. That's located on the western end of Lesdale Street. So on the left-hand side, you can see a map where the site is highlighted in purple on the side of the hill. On the right-hand side, you can see the same site a bit more close up. So you can see that it's at the end of Lesdale Street and that it contains an existing house. You also note that it's mainly cleared of any vegetation. The other two addresses, 18 and 29 Leicester Street, are affected by the subdivision for the road lot, and the property at 2/10 Ironbark Drive that's in the southeast corner, is affected by a service connection. We have the next slide, please. So all of the property is located within the general residential zone in red and a joint environmental management zone in olive to the west. Again, the proposal accords with the purpose of the general residential zone, which is to provide for a range of residential developments, which includes multiple dwellings. You note that the general residential zone goes around 3 sides of the property, and where the hill is and the forested area, that land is within the environmental management zone. That won't be affected by the proposal at all. Can we have the next slide, please? So this shows the proposal. So the application is for 28 additional dwellings on a site with an existing dwelling and subdivision for road lot. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have got the end of a cul-de-sac. That's not there at the moment, so that's part of the application. The road finishes in a dead end at the moment. And there'll be a small amount of land taken for the area of the cul-de-sac, where there at the moment are 3 access strips for 18, 19 and 29 Lesdale Street. And the cul-de-sac was necessary to service the proposal with waste management. So the proposed dwellings will be arranged in 5 rows around internal roads, and the existing dwelling would have separate access with the existing driveway, as you can see on the plan. And the proposed dwelling will be a combination of brick dwellings and timber imitation dwellings on stilts. There will be 13 timber dwellings and 15 brick dwellings. So the brick dwellings are usually double story and the other ones are usually single story on stilts. There will be 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, either with garages or carports, and there will be 2 spaces, car parking spaces for each dwelling and 8 visitor spaces. The dwellings would vary in height from 4.67 meters to 8.5 meters, which is the maximum permissible height. And it's proposed to do the development in 7 stages. So there'll be start entitled, and also there'll be 7 stages for the proposal. In terms of discretions, let's have a look at the site photos first. So this is the subject site, sort of roughly framed by the red rectangle on the left-hand side, and that's the existing house on there. So the proposal will be below the tree line. The photo on the right is looking down towards other houses in Leicester. No, sorry, it's looking up, at the existing house, but it's taken from the end of Leicester Street. Next slide, please. So this shows the access, the dead end at the moment. So the front part of that access strip, you can see that's where the cul-de-sac is going to be. And the photo on the right-hand side, that one is looking back down at the houses in Leicester Street. So that's looking east. The next slide, please. So this is, again, still looking east as well. So you can see on the left-hand side that there's the first house is the same brick house again as we saw before. And then the photo is nearly perfectly matched with the one on the right-hand side to be continuing line of what you actually can see when you go to the corner and then you go to the south boundary of the lot. So the residential development along the south boundary as well. The next slide, please. So this showing the discretions. So there's discretions for retaining walls are usually discretionary when for two reasons, either that they're higher than 1 meter in height or they're closer than 1.5 meters to the boundary. So there's discretion for the retaining wall for the bin enclosure, which is 1.42 meters in height. There's also discretion for a retaining wall near unit 9, that's 1.1 meters high, and also for one near unit 19, that's less than a meter high, but it's within 1.5 meters of the boundary. It's all considered that those retaining walls are acceptable and they would not cause any problems in terms of overshadowing or anything like that. So it's considered that they're acceptable. Another discretion is for dwellings to the north of private outdoor space. So a lot of the dwellings do comply. So there's usually private outdoor space area, which on your landscape plan, I think it's the third or the fourth plan in the attachment, that's a nominated private outdoor space. That's a minimum of 4 times 6 that each unit's got to have, although most units have more than that, but that's the private outdoor space that's got to comply with certain requirements. And so some of the dwellings do have dwellings to the north of private outdoor space. However, they comply with the performance criteria because only half of it will be affected on the shortest day of the year. So that would satisfy the performance criteria for that. It's only unit 23 that cannot comply with that. There's more than half of the private outdoor space affected by the other unit. However, that dwelling has, their primary private outdoor space is nominated in front of the unit, but they also got actually more private outdoor space at the back, and they also got a balcony. So it was considered, despite the fact that the nominated private outdoor space was affected, that there's sufficient private outdoor space to cater for the needs of the residents. So it was considered that that was acceptable. Another discretion is normally decks have to have a 6 meter separation from windows of other units. And so for units 6 to 9 and units 16 to 19, the decks are closer than that. However, the units opposite those decks, they actually have high windows at 1.7 meters above the ground, so you can't actually see in, despite the fact that the decks are fairly close to the other units. So it was considered that that was acceptable as well because there weren't any privacy concerns. But the planning scheme doesn't make special provisions for higher up windows in that circumstance. So that discretion is considered acceptable. Then also there was separation of driveways from windows for units 20 and unit 22. They're sort of in the top row on the bottom side of the driveway. Again, there is landscaping separation there. It's just not 2.5 meters wide, but it's considered because those units are the 3 last ones on the driveway, that there wasn't really that much traffic going up and down the driveway, and also that the traffic that does go up and down the driveway, that the lights wouldn't be shining directly in the window because they'd be shining along the driveway. It was considered that that was okay, and there will be landscaping there required as per landscaping plan. It's just short of the 2.5 meter width, so it was considered that was acceptable as well. The next discretion is in regards to the bin enclosure. Normally, bin enclosure is meant to be 4.5 meters from the road. So this one will be 0.79 meters, well, between 0.798 meters and 1.954 meters away from the new road, from the new cul-de-sac. However, it's considered that there should be some extra landscaping provided to screen it, although the bins would be screened because the bin enclosure does have to have a timber screen to screen all the bins. But it's considered that that sort of stands out a bit when you're approaching the site. So it was considered that extra landscaping should be required to screen the bin enclosure because it's close to the road. But it's also noted there is actually a nature strip between the road and the front boundary of the site as well. So it was considered it would be okay if landscaping was provided. Not a discretion for any subdivision is the suitability of roads, and the development engineer found that the road was acceptable and there's conditions imposed in regards to how the road should be built. And another discretion is because there will be two accesses of the new road because the existing house will retain its existing access and there'll be a new access for the dwellings. Again, it was considered that was acceptable and it won't cause a problem because there's not that much traffic at the end of the road that multiple accesses will cause a problem. And also the application is discretionary for a traffic increase, which also was considered acceptable. In terms of representations, could we have the next slide, please? We have received 4 representations. The first issue was in regards to the road network, and actually what was queried was the capacity between the Southern Outlet and Kallang Avenue, which is noted that those locations are actually outside the Glenorchy Council area. So we can't do anything about that. But in terms of overall traffic, it was considered that the existing road network can cope quite easily with the additional traffic for the road. So that is considered satisfactory. The next issue that was raised was fencing costs. Fencing costs are not something that's regulated by the planning scheme, so that's regulated under the Boundary Fences Act. So it's usually an issue between the neighbours. The neighbours usually have to negotiate anything about fences. So that's outside of what we can consider under the planning scheme. Another issue that was raised by 3 of the representatives was the building height and privacy and overshadowing. That is actually something that the planning scheme does regulate. So the main issues was for units 6 and 7 and for unit which is in the bottom row in the middle, and unit 14 which is in the second row on the south boundary. So we did have a look at that, and those units, they comply with the maximum height. So maximum height is 8.5 meters. The highest one of those 3 units is 7.2 meters in height. And normally the way the planning scheme works is as high as you go, as further you have to be away from the boundary. If a dwelling was 8.5 meters, which is the highest it could go, then it would have to be 5 meters away from the boundary. And all of those dwellings are 5 meters away from the boundary, even though they're not actually 8.5 meters high. So they would only have to be 4.2 meters away from the boundary to comply. And it's also noted that all the dwellings on the other side of the fence, they actually got their backyards there. So there's substantial separation as well for their dwellings from the proposed dwellings, although it will be big change, of course, having development there when there previously wasn't any. I do acknowledge that, but however, those dwellings will comply with the planning scheme in regards to that. I'm also recommending a condition to make sure that none of the dwellings are higher than 8.5, although like I said, the ones in the bottom row, none of those is 8.5 meters high. The next issue was noise pollution. So people were concerned about the noise that would come from any of the dwellings. That is not something that we can look at. Planning scheme only regulates noise from industrial sites. It doesn't regulate noise from residential properties. But of course, there will be a change having, at the moment, it looks like a semi-rural area next door, which obviously will be quite serene. And so obviously that will change with the urban development. But also it's noted that the site is not being developed to full density. So the proposal is one dwelling per 640 square meters. The scheme actually allows one dwelling per 325 square meters. So it's probably only half as dense as it could be, it provided there's no other impediments to it. But anyway, it'll be, I mean, it won't be expected that there'll be that much noise anyway. It'd be just no different to any other urban environment. And then the last issue that was raised was that this proposal might affect property values. Again, that is not something that the planning scheme regulates. So there's nothing that the council can consider in regards to property values. So that's outside any of the standards that we must consider. In terms of conditions, there will be condition that they're proposing to do the development in 7 stages, that they comply with the staging plan, which is in the set of attachments. Again, there's a condition for maximum height of 8.5 meters. Also, there's a condition for the grade of private open space to be as they're shown it on the landscaping plan. And also there is a landscaping condition in terms of screening the bin enclosure. This is in addition to other landscaping conditions that are imposed by the development engineer as well. So yes, and then there's all the development engineering conditions that are recommended as well. So overall, the proposal was found compliant with the planning scheme and it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sylvia. Another comprehensive presentation and report there for us. Any questions for Sylvia?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Just a question just regarding, and excuse me if I've missed the detail, just with regarding the waste collection. Obviously there'll be 3, I'm assuming 3 bins for every unit?
No, I think they're shared bins.
They're shared?
The next one I think is 1 for each, but this one I believe was shared bins. A total of 30 is in one of the conditions.
Sorry.
Or hang on, if you go to page 127.
There'll be a total of 30 bins that are shared, and not all of them be collected each week because there are alternative weeks for which ones I think are going to get collected.
Question resolved. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think there's a condition. There is one condition about waste management, which is condition 36, which relates specifically to the design for the bin enclosure. And that says where it must suit 30 by 240 litre wheelie bins. My understanding is there's nothing within the legislation that allows us to impose conditions on number of bins, but we can give advice to applicants and we ask that they work with our waste management area to come up. So we've got a policy on it and developers need to work with council within that policy. Is that right, Director?
Yes, that's correct, mate.
Yeah, that's correct.
And could we add to that that they could choose to have weekly garbage collection if they wanted to as a group, so that would overcome some issues if there was concerns there. It just costs a bit extra. So
I think most unit developments do get weekly collection. Yeah.
That's right. I just had visions of
mountains.
the sea of red, yellow and green.
If they're shared bins,
They do have weekly collection if they're shared bins. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Good question. Any other questions? No. We don't have the any representatives or the applicant here this afternoon. So if there's no further questions, we have a recommendation before us that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of multiple dwellings, 28 new and 1 existing, in stages, including service connection at 210 Ironbark Drive with subdivision for a new road lot and construction of a new cul-de-sac at 19 Lesdale Street, 18 Lesdale Street, 29 Lesdale Street and 210 Ironbark Drive, Claremont, subject to 36 conditions which are outlined in our papers there. We know we did receive 4 representations and Planning Authority has read and considered those in full, and Sylvia has addressed those issues in the report. There were 8 discretions which Sylvia has also addressed. Do I have someone to move that recommendation as a motion? Move to Alderman King. Someone to second? Alderman Quick. Alderman King.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Sylvia, thank you for your presentation. Extremely informative, and I think you've covered you know, we obviously don't have many questions because you've covered everything, so I'm happy to move that this goes forward as it stands.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion? Nope. I too support this recommendation, similar to my comments on the last subdivision we approved. We need more housing in our municipality. It's using some of the last bits of greenfield land we have left for residential purposes, so I'm supportive of this application. I'm satisfied that the planner, Sylvia, has addressed the issues raised by the representatives. I note those concerns, but I'm confident they've been addressed and satisfied that the discretions meet the performance criteria. So, no further discussion. I'll go back to Alderman King to close debate.
I'm happy, thanks, Mayor.
Okay, I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. And Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, the Glenorchy Planning Authority has approved this application. The permit will now be issued to the applicant and to all of the representatives. They will have an ability to appeal to the Tasmanian Administrative and Civil Tribunal if they're dissatisfied with the decision. If they do not appeal, then the permit will have effect after 14 days.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7, proposed use and development, 11 multiple dwellings at 97 Montrose Road, Montrose. And Chantel is our planning officer presenting this one. So do we have Chantel online?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is a proposal for 11 multiple dwellings at 97 Montrose Road. If you go to slide 1, this shows the subject site. The proposal is for buildings that will range between a maximum of 2 and 3 stories. So it'll be a combination on the site. If you go to slide 2, the zoning map. So the property is zoned general residential, and it's one of the remaining large undeveloped parcels of the land, as you can see there at the end of Montrose Road. If you go to slide 3, this shows the site plan. So the site is particularly steep, and the way the developer has dealt with this is by providing 2 driveways on site. In addition to this, we had discussion with the developer and for providing the pedestrian access and also for managing waste as well in terms of pickup. The footpath is proposed to be constructed along Montrose Road in addition to works on this site, as you can see. If you go to slide 4, this shows a useful 3-dimensional proposal, and as you can see, the dwellings have been layered. So right at the back, looking down from the house above, they will look a single story. You may also notice on the left-hand side there's a blank area there. The proposal is burdened by an underground TasNet networks line, so this has been done in conjunction with discussions with them as well. The proposal has a number of discretions, majority raised due to the slope of the site, and has been designed to minimise the cut and fill. So if you go to slide 5, so it's a bit difficult to see the site at the moment. The vegetation goes right up to the road on that side, and there's only a footpath on the opposite side. The proposal was advertised and no representations were received for this one. So if you go to slide 6, so as you can see where the footpath ends on the left-hand side, and the proposal is to continue that footpath for the length of the property boundary along the front. So the proposal is recommended for approval with a number of conditions. This was worked with engineering and the developer and TasNet Works over a number of months, which is why there was a bit of a delay before advertising. And it is conditioned to ensure a reasonable outcome for this site and is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chantel. Any questions for Chantel? No questions? I had a question about waste again. I guess this one's a little bit different, so that there's not shared bins proposed this time around, and I'm just seeking some clarity on, this is a multiple dwelling development, but does council our waste team make these recommendations based on the area available for bins on the footpath? Is that how we determine? Because obviously it's different for different, we get different advice for different developments, even though there might be the same number of units.
Absolutely. We worked extensively with the waste department and the developer. So in the previous design that you were looking at, what happened in that arrangement is the proposal is for the extension to provide a turning area for the truck. And in that particular proposal, there was discussion, at least at the early stages that I'm familiar with, where the truck would enter the entrance of the site only, so there would actually be the potential to pick up the bins inside rather than on the cul-de-sac. I'm not sure what the latest discussion is, but I know that was where the initial discussion began from. With this one, the initial discussion began from the fact that this proposal is deceptively small. It's actually quite a long frontage. You can sort of see on the opposite side of the road, there are about 4 properties it fronts with on the opposite side. So for the area that they would require for the bins to be taken out, they'd probably only need about half that footpath to provide safe access and safe footing for the truck to pick up the bins. What we do have under the Parking and Transport Code is we have ability to consider access for both traffic and pedestrians and safety. And so that's where you see the full length of the footpath proposed to meet those requirements.
Okay, thank you. So on one particular day, each one, there'll be 22 bins along that footpath.
Yes, and if you can, it's a little bit hard to see on the slide, but what the designer has done is they've deliberately widened the footpath to allow for the bins and for people to walk through the footpath without obviously being hindered.
Yep, I can see that there. Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions?
Just regarding, thank you, Mayor, the flood risk, you noted that that the flood hazard report wasn't completed or deemed as not required. Was there any reason of that?
Yes, so there were some discussions between myself and the development engineer. It mainly, so if you're looking at Unit 6 on the site plan, and you can see it's set back about 4.5 metres there. That's the tiny portion of the land that is potentially impacted by the flood-prone area. So the impact was deemed too minimal to ask or to burden the developer with a full flood-prone study. I mean, this is something that our engineers have a look at every time because a flood-prone study is quite extensive. It takes a long time. And so we have to weigh up, is it worth it in each case? And because we're only looking at the tiny portion near the corner of Unit 6, we have hydraulics engineers in-house, and it was and council staff decided that they had enough information to make that decision.
Yep, no worries. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further questions?
The access for Unit 10 and 11 to Montrose Road. So that if that's up that top end, that means there will be 2 entrances onto Montrose Road. Is that right?
Yes. However, it may not look like that visually because on the opposite side of the road, you've got 4 properties facing it. So because the block is so large, yes, we do have 2 accesses, and that is a discretion. However, there will be quite a gap in between.
Thank you. There's no further questions. We have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 97 Montrose Road, Montrose, subject to 14 conditions outlined in our papers there. And there were no representations received. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Alderman Yaxley, someone to second. Alderman Cockshut. Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, like we've said in the last couple of comments, it's great to see development happening in our municipality, and it's it's great that developers are looking at taking advantage of what land is available. So so it's a great positive story and a positive action to have. So I'd be happy to recommend it.
Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further discussion?
No questions, just echo Alderman Yaxley and yourself, Mayor, your commentary in regards to development in the Glenorchy municipality. It's great to see, and in terms of the housing crisis, you know, the more housing we can have is in the city is even better. So it's good to see this all coming through.
Thank you, Alderman Cockshut. I agree, and I am satisfied that the report that we've been presented with demonstrates that the performance criteria around the 8 discretions are met. And pleased to see there are no representations to this particular item as well. So very happy to support the motion that's before us. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Yaxley, to close debate.
No, nothing further. Thank you.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. Once again, Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here?
Thank you. Again, this application has now been approved by the Glenorchy Planning Authority. A planning permit will be issued. That will only be sent to the applicant because there were no representatives. The applicant will have an ability to appeal to TASCAT if they have any issues with the conditions of the approval. Otherwise, if that does not occur, the permit will become valid and they can act on that permit.
Excellent, thank you. Item 8, proposed use and development, cement silos and associated infrastructure for concrete batching plant, manufacturing and processing at 8B Lambton Avenue, Derwent Park. And Lewis is our planning officer presenting this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This application is for cement silos and other infrastructure for an existing concrete batching plant at the Hazelbros site in Derwent Park. If we go to the first slide, we can see here on the left the kind of wider site and the surrounds. The concrete batching plant itself is in the little triangular extension of the site and is solely in that little that triangular section. The site sits between Main Road and the Brooker Highway. There is the Goodwood Primary School to the northeast and the showgrounds to the northwest. Proposal is in the general industrial zone. It's considered to be suitably located in that zone, being a heavy industry, and accords with the zone purpose statement. So this is the site plan of the proposal. The cement silos are on the north of the site, and the other infrastructure kind of connects to that. Includes aggregate storage bins, conveyor system, and underground kind of bin hopper system that feeds into the plant. The proposal is, I guess, an extension of the existing plant, and will add, so this kind of, all the additions will add a wet mixing component to the plant, and adding to what is currently there is like a dry mixing plant. So we'll kind of diversify what they can produce. It will increase the capacity by about 20%. And this plant the additions will kind of work in tandem with what is there. But it's only increasing the capacity by around 20%. On the site, the existing plant was approved in 2003, so it's been operating there for around 20 years. And the proposal with these upgrades will reduce the requirement for a front-end loader, which is currently used to load in the different materials. The upgrades will kind of automate that and bring the plant kind of up to standard, or improve its operation, and which will greatly reduce the impacts from the front-end loader, being noise and dust are the main impacts that it creates. If you go to number 5, thanks, Trevor. These are just 2 photos of the site. The first one on the left is taken from across the road on Lambton Avenue. It's the main access that trucks use to enter and exit the site. And the other is from internally within the site, from the car parking area. A picture of the existing plant and buildings there. So it's kind of difficult to get a photo of where the upgrades will occur, but it's kind of on the other side of those buildings and existing silos. Under the assessment, there's 2 discretions. The first one is under the zone standards for the building height. The acceptable solution allows for a building height of 20 metres, whereas the proposed silos are 24.15 metres. However, it's considered that the proposal complies with the acceptable solution, as that extra height is considered necessary for its use, and any impacts on adjoining properties is not considered to be unreasonable, and the proposal should improve the operation, reduce emissions such as noise and dust, and therefore should kind of improve or reduce any impact on adjoining properties. Oh, sorry, no, we'll stay there. There's 3 applicable codes. The proposal complies with the relevant standards of the Parking and Sustainable Transport Code, as well as the Road and Railway Assets Code. There is a discretion under the Attenuation Code. Concrete batching plant is an activity with potential to cause emissions. It's a level 1 activity, which means it has an attenuation area of 200 metres. Within that 200-metre attenuation area, there is a sensitive use, which is the school oval from the Goodwood Primary School. There is also properties in the general residential and inner residential zones within that area. Now, the attenuation area is measured from the boundaries of the whole site, and not from, I guess, where the activity is occurring. So those properties in the general residential zone and inner residential zone are still separated by at least 250 metres. As mentioned before, the proposal should improve the operation of the existing plant, reduce any negative impacts, and therefore it's considered to satisfy the performance criteria. Proposal was assessed under this standard by an environmental health officer, and is assessed as satisfying the performance criteria and complying with that standard. No representations were received for the application, which is really good. The proposal is here before the GPA for the cost of works only. and in conclusion, it's assessed with complying with all relevant standards of the planning scheme and is recommended for approval with the 9 conditions.
Great. Thank you, Lewis. Very well presented. Any questions for Lewis?
I would like to say, oh, sorry, no, you go. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Alderman Yaxley.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question, just regarding the other 2 silos. Would they remain or would they be removed?
Yeah, so they would remain, and so this, the proposal's, I guess, seen as an expansion of the plant. What's existing will remain. So what's there, the dry mixing plant, they require that do the more specialised orders, such as exposed aggregate or any colouring, wouldn't be able to be, I guess, produced in the new extension area. So they'll retain both and kind of use one mainly one at a time, kind of on a day-to-day basis, and kind of schedule the kind of different jobs around that. But yeah, it would remain. Yes.
And just in second onto that, just do you know the existing height of the current 2?
That's a good question.
You haven't got up and measured them, Lewis?
Not by hand, no. Don't have that. I could find out, but not on hand. No.
Well, it's just, it's in terms of just, if it was already above the 20, that would just...
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? And the different standards would have applied back when they were...
When it was, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. I believe it's a bit under 20. Vague recollection from looking at the approved plans. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions, Alderman Yaxley?
No, thank
Nothing? Thank you. Alderman King, question?
Lewis, good job, son. Is this your first one? I missed you before.
No,
it is your
first one, yeah.
You don't have to stand up, but we like it.
Yeah,
It's really, it's refreshing. It's refreshing. It's encouraging. 20% efficiency improvement, did you say?
20% increasing in the production.
Increasing the production. Does that mean 20% more heavy vehicles going back and forward onto the road? And you might not be able to answer that, so don't feel you need to.
I think, well, yeah, I won't say yes or no, but I believe with the upgrades, they can do a bigger batch size from 8 cubic meters to 9 cubic meters per load. So it may not necessarily increase the vehicle movements if they're doing slightly bigger loads on each truck. So yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah.
Buy bigger trucks.
Well, which means a lot more weight on our road, and Director Riel might be able to, with his past building experience, might be able to give us a little bit of impression there as to, do you think it can make a big difference to the roads or anything?
Through you, Mayor, it's possible, but a lot of the trucks are set up to take bigger loads these days anyway, because the maximum cubic metres you used to get, I think, was 5, but now the trucks are all the double tandem steer and dual wheel, and I think they can take 9 cubic metres anyway. So a batching plant probably hasn't kept up with the size of the truck increases, because if it can only batch 5 or 8 cubic metres, there'll be empty space in the truck. So it doesn't necessarily mean more trucks on the road. However, there probably will be a little bit of an increase given that production will increase. It's a bit of a balance, I guess. There's probably some extra trucks, but the trucks that are already on the road can take a bigger load.
And does that mean more, obviously mean more weight on the road, I think, and you'll correct me on this, I'm sure, but a cubic metre of concrete is about 2.2 tonnes as well.
It's about that.
About that, give or take.
About that.
You get underload or not, you know.
The trucks are set up though, so the load's spread evenly over their axles. So, and there are standards that are in place so that you can't, overload an axle or point load, and it does damage to our roads. So weight is distributed evenly over the axles and over the road surface. I guess it's fair to say though, where we have heavy traffic, we do notice a bit more wear and tear on our roads, and we're always mindful if a road's a bus route or a B-double route, we actually increase the sub-base a little bit when we renew the roads.
Thank you. And thank you, Lewis, that was great. Come again.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. And whilst I note concern about the impact on road, obviously it's not a discretion that we can consider in deciding on this
Just
application.
an old man's question, Mayor.
Fair enough. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No questions, thank you, Mayor. Just comment say, great presentation, and all the engineering, health and safety concerns all get covered off, and I've got no issues with the height, the discretion, so good job.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, we have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of cement silos and associated infrastructure for concrete batching plan at 8B Lambton Avenue, Derwent Park, subject to the 6 conditions set out in our report. Noting no representations were received. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Alderman King, someone to second? Alderman Yaxley. Alderman King, over to you.
After such a wonderful presentation, how could you not move it, Mayor? That's all I really need to say on this. I think it's good for Hazel, it's good that they can improve efficiency, and I'm grateful for the report you've given us because it covers the concerns we might have had in our minds otherwise, so thank you.
Thank you, Alderman King. Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just, it's good to see economic activity happening, and obviously, growing city. It's a positive thing to have businesses that are looking to grow and to looking to expand. So I think it's great. My only concern was a little bit in terms of the location with the school and the ground, but I'm satisfied that obviously it's already been there for 20 years. So and obviously the improvement from the noise and the other considerations have all been satisfied. So yeah, happy to recommend.
Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further discussion? No, I too am happy to support, noting it really only came to us at GPA because of the cost of work. So I note the investment Hazer Brothers is making in economic development, as you say, in our municipality. I'm satisfied the 2 discretions have been met, and that I think it's 4.1, around 4 or just around 4 metres higher than the acceptable solution anyway. It's not a great deal when you think of the visual impact already of the 2 silos that are already there. It's not like it's something new to the landscape. So I'm happy that the performance criteria are satisfied, that obviously, as we've heard, the emissions of dust and noise will be reduced by the new concrete batching wet mix silo. So in addition to the plants, I'm happy to support the recommendations. Further discussion, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman King.
Thank you, Chair. Well done, Lewis. That's all we need to say.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Trevor, do we need to explain the process again?
I can explain the process again.
For completeness. Thank you.
The Glenorchy Planning Authority has now approved this application. A permit will be issued to the applicant. As there are no representatives, we don't need to send it to any representatives. Provided the applicant is satisfied with the conditions and doesn't appeal to TASCAP, the permit will be able to be acted upon.
Thank you. Very good. Moving on then to item 9, proposed use and development, carport residential, 34 Hopkins Street, Moona. And our planning officer presenting this one is Peter. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I trust you've all read the report, and I'll keep it brief. The proposal is for a 17.6 metre squared carport, which is set back approximately 2.5 metres from the frontage. It invokes a discretionary consideration owing to the frontage setback. The site being in Hopkins Street, it's on the western side, which is primarily residential, though there is the Catholic school there. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the breakdown, and a lot of the development is reflected by the zoning pattern. So you've got the maroon being inner residential houses. The other side is general business from recollection, with a few houses, and then the beige sort of colour is community purpose. So when a carport is within the in a residential zone. There are two applicable standards, one being purely for carports and then the other being for any part of a dwelling within the frontage setback. By way of relevant background for this site, in 2015 a 4-bay garage was approved at the rear of the lot. Other than that, I haven't found any relevant background. So as I mentioned, there are two standards which we need to look at. Now, this is the proposal, sorry.
So back to Lee.
Yes, so sorry, go to the next one, please. This is the proposal plan. It's an open walled carport, 3.2 wide, 2.2 high at the posts. It's got an apex roof, which I measured, scaling off the plans, to be 2.6 metres at the apex. So there's 1 metre off the house, 1.5 off the side boundary, and 2.3 metres from the front boundary. If we go to the next picture, this is the property in the middle, the red brick house. There is a similar design and age dwelling on the left-hand side, the west, and then on the right-hand side, on the east, there's a unit development. There are 3 hipped roof, relatively modest size, multiple dwellings. Go to the next one, please, Trevor. I'll get into the assessment under the standards because this is where this carport, which is up the street, becomes relevant. So when we have a carport which is less than 4 metres from the front boundary setback, we have performance criteria which require that the carport be have a setback which is compatible with the setbacks of existing garages or carports in the street. So the logical thing to do is to go and find if there are any in the street, and there is one which is at the school site, and it's 144 metres away to the west. So you will have seen in my assessment I've gone into a bit of an argument as to how a nominally consistent distance is not necessarily compatible in the sense of the term, by where compatibility is to tend towards harmony, correspondence, whereas a nominal consistency would be picking a dimension and saying this dimension exists somewhere in the street, so therefore we have a precedent or a rule to follow. I take the view that the compatibility is, with respect to the objective, something which we're looking at having reasonable consistent separation between dwellings and their frontages. My assessment is that to rely on one existing as a nominally consistent setback is not true to the objective of the standard, and so for that reason, and this is by virtue of the existing having sort of a setback where the access is perpendicular, affording landscaping, whereas the proposal is straight into the dwelling. So if we go to the next image, actually, you can see the design of the carport. Now, I don't know the age of this structure. It looks like it's been painted recently, or it might just be new roller doors, but it's a sort of open metal bar construction. And I suppose the school site's got a number of structures on it. I couldn't date all of them. There's some very early buildings. If we go back, actually, please, Trevor, you can see immediately to the north of where the X is, which shows the carport, you've got a heritage building, which is used as an administration building. There's then the church at the front, and then the school building to the rear. My assessment is that to pick the carport width as that one to set a rule would be contrary to the objective of the standard, and so in my opinion the proposal doesn't comply with this standard. Moving to the next one, which is 942P3, the setback asks us to look at the siting and scale of a dwelling that it does not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity. That's part A. And then part B, provide separation between dwellings on adjoining properties that's consistent with that established in the properties in the area. For A, I don't think there is any unreasonable impacts with overshadowing or bulk. It's a fairly modest sized structure, albeit within the frontage setback. So A is not the critical issue. What I find is the critical issue is B, in that the proposals I've said 500, but I believe it's 1.5 metres from, 500 millimetres from the side boundary fence, and then a portion of that, which would be about 1.7 metres, is within the frontage. That doesn't exist anywhere in Hopkins Street. For a dwelling, the carport, which is for the school, is for a school, not for a dwelling. So again, I can't find that it's providing consistently separated dwellings, because for this standard, there is no other dwelling-related carport in the street. For the other standard, it doesn't talk about dwellings specifically, it just talks about carports. So I would consider that it's relevant in that respect, but in looking at what is compatible, what is broadly, in harmony, we're sort of picking an outlier and setting that as a rule. If we were to rely on that as being nominally consistent, therefore it's established and you can perpetuate that, which again is contrary to the objective of the standard. Aside of those ordinary development standards, we have the Parking and Sustainable Transport Code, which applies to all development. There are no applicable standards for this. It's an existing hard stand. It's pavers, but it's an existing area for a vehicle parking, existing access, simply a structure being put on top of it. The proposal was advertised for the statutory 14-day period. We received one representation. The representation raised matters relating to precedence. Precedence is not necessarily a sort of a rule. In my opinion, it's outcomes which we're striving towards, not perpetuating things which may have been a problem or present a mistake. So I'm not persuaded, even on the other side of that, that establishing a precedence is an issue. Everything is always assessed on its merits at the time. The existing carport, which the representative picked up on, they state predates the existing scheme. Its age I am unsure of. Whether it complied at the time is fine. It has existing rights. Whether it doesn't comply presently, I'm not assessing the existing carport, I'm assessing a proposed carport. Stormwater and flooding on the street, which the representative was concerned the proposal may exacerbate. It's a modest sized structure. It's not even be considered under the stormwater policy. So any existing issues about stormwater being discharged in the wrong spot or the capacity of the road, I suppose is for council in managing urban drainage. So in conclusion, the proposal is assessed as failing to comply with two of the relevant performance criteria. Again, that is because it doesn't present a compatible harmony with established carport dwellings in the street, and the other being for consistency of setbacks for dwellings where there is no other dwelling in the street which is built within the frontage setback. For that reason, it's recommended to be refused.
Thank you. Peter, any questions for Peter?
Yes,
Alderman
thank you,
King.
Chair. So Peter, your biggest concern is the setback?
That's the concern that I had. The performance criteria caused me to look at, being that any carport which is set back less than 4 metres needs to be compatible with the setbacks of carports which are existing in the street. You can't have regard to topographical constraints, which there are none in Hopkins Street. So yes, I can't find that this carport is compatible with the setbacks of existing carports.
And I get all that, and your advice is sound, and we appreciate that, and you always present really well. So, but if we were to, I'm not saying we are, if we were to disagree, is that another motion?
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I figured.
We'd have to have an alternative motion.
To disagree,
that's
to
right.
approve it.
Yeah. Peter, can you just talk me through, you mentioned about not setting a precedent, because one of the things that runs through my mind is if there are no, you said the other one, 144 metres up the road, we can't consider, like in terms of compatibility. So how does someone ever be the first in the street to do something?
Yes, yeah, that is an interesting point. I'm not saying that we can't, that's a strong word, that we can't look at this one. What I'm saying is in looking at the carport for the school, I don't believe that they correspond. The carport for the school is set behind vegetation. Its presentation in the street is much different to the presentation of this one, albeit with a setback in a distance of metres being the same. The way that we can measure one against the other is not the same because they're different how they sit on the land. Now, when you say how does one be the first in the street, that's supposing that carports less than 4 metres is something that we want. We have really a standard which is trying to have structures set back from the street. In a general sense, people see that as desirable so that you aren't closed in when walking in urban areas. I'm not sure that all development is available to all people all the time.
Sure, yeah, that answers the question. So had the applicant set back the carport by 1.7 metres more, it would have been...
It would make the
we
acceptable
would be having this
solution.
conversation.
That's correct.
So was that possible or is that possible?
The carport as it stands is 1 metre from their house. So if they pushed it back all the way to the house, they would still be within 4 metres. I think we would still be having this same conversation. The second standard, it would still be within the frontage setback, and there still is no real comparable example otherwise. So the only thing which I toyed with in my mind was whether the carport's length could be reduced in order for it to comply. In that instance, I checked the length of a Ranger and the length of a Camry, and for both, the carport length wouldn't cover the vehicle. So I don't know whether there'd be any point if you were to have a 4.7 metre or thereabouts long carport.
And was it proposed to be an enclosed carport or just a,
No, so it's a gabled roof, yes, and it's open wall construction. So
open wall construction.
Literally 4 posts and a roof. The gable end is to be enclosed, that's all.
Question if I may, Chair, did we not recently approve a carport that was right towards the front, the back?
Yes, we did, and I
stepped out because it was
declared an interest in that one. But yes, we did, and that's what I'm thinking. Like in that instance, we said, like there were no others in the street, and we said
there were other carports, but not that far forward.
No, I don't think there were
There's no
any other carports, really. Yeah, so I remember having that conversation. Well, someone's got to be the first. You know, this whole conversation around.
And I don't think you were here for that.
No, it was a while ago now.
What address? What street area was that?
It was up off Barossa Road, up that way.
I guess through the chair, I just mentioned, I guess adding to what Peter's been saying here, the way the planning scheme's set up and the outcome it's seeking to achieve is to have carport set back 4 metres. However, you know, in order to be fair, in locations where there are already carports much closer than 4 metres, what the scheme is saying is that you can allow less than 4 metres where you already have established in the streetscape something much less than 4. And I guess examples are, you know, another example would be a planning scheme that talks about having setbacks for dwellings. But if you've got terrace houses in the street, you've got established already buildings much closer to the footpath. So it's not a case of one being the first, it's a case of looking at what's already there and seeing whether what's already there provides a basis for reducing it below the 4 metre setback.
Any other questions?
More of a, sorry, through you, Matt. The only concern is that I drive past this property a number of times a day, and you never notice houses as you drive past them, but I obviously particularly took a notice recently. And then I've done a drive-by around to try and find something that was similar, and there's structures that are there, but not necessarily carports, if that makes sense. It's within that 4 metres. So I guess it's just more of a general comment that I'm just concerned that if we could reconfigure I mean, I know we can only do what we've got before us, but if we could potentially maybe go back to the applicant and say, well, come back to us if it was attached to the house within a certain, further away from the frontage. So I understand, people want protection for the vehicles and all that sort of thing as well. So it's a difficult one because it doesn't quite fall in. So I appreciate that as well, but I'm trying to look at the bigger picture, but also trying to keep him within the rules of the code. So yeah.
Tricky one.
Well, it's a discretion, sorry.
Yeah, you're
It's a discretion really, and we've let worse discretions go through, and this is not directed at you, Peter, it's just, and it's not what you necessarily call it a development, but it's something that's important to a resident in the city, and so I'm just struggling with it myself that it might fit. I mean, yeah, it might fit, but it's not that it doesn't fit black and white, it's just that it's more aesthetically, is that the way to put it, or is it?
Doesn't meet the performance criteria according to.
Yes, so, I mean.
I'm not trying to get you to change your mind or anything.
No. Aesthetics, I suppose, is a part of it. What we're looking at is, does this development, as the objective states, provide consistency of separation of dwellings for, I don't want to get my performance criteria mixed up here. So we've got P2 and P3. The objective for the standard is the same, and I might read it because that might be helpful. So the objective, which is what we're here to do, is that the siting and scale of dwellings provides reasonably consistent separation between dwellings and their frontage within a street, provides consistency in the apparent scale, bulk, massing and proportion of dwellings, provides separation between dwellings on adjoining properties to allow reasonable opportunity of daylight, sunlight to enter habitable rooms. C, I think, is less critical for this one. So it's really about A and B, consistency in apparent scale and bulk, and reasonably consistent separation between dwellings and their frontage. Critically, the school is not a dwelling, but it does have a carport. And when we look at the standard which says a garage or carport for a dwelling must have 1, not less than 4, it says must have a setback from a primary frontage that is compatible with the setbacks of existing garages or carports. So we can bring in the school on that one. For the other one, we're talking about dwellings. The school isn't a dwelling. So then we're looking at what is the effect of a dwelling, which includes its carport, being forward of that building line. And as I said, in a general principle sense, building forward of the building line where it really isn't, happening like a set of terraces or whatever, is something that generally is considered a less than positive outcome in urban areas.
So, through you, Chair, so we've knocked back things before that have been recommended.
Yep.
And probably got a bit of trouble with the tribunal. Could somebody take this to tribunal and say, hey, these guys are unfair, or is this?
I think anyone has the opportunity to appeal if they wish. The applicant equally has an opportunity to appeal if the refusal is upheld or endorsed, however you want to term it. So this isn't the end by any means. This is you making a decision based on my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. And I assume the applicant's aware that it didn't meet
yes.
the criteria in your assessment.
I phoned and had the applicant come into here, and I spoke with them about process and that they could offer an extension of time, which they had, to allow it to go to the council meeting to sort of afford a procedural fairness. So that's what this is about, really, because we only got the one representation. I think refusals we ideally would, for the purposes of procedural fairness, bring to you rather than do them off my desk.
Yeah, thanks for that. Alderman Quinn?
How many carports are in the neighbouring vicinity of the proposed one?
Didn't undertake a survey. I was only looking at this section of Hopkins Street. So within the frontage, there's the one at the school. As for ones which meet the acceptable solution, they're not really to be considered because the setback is obviously compliant with the acceptable solution. So it'd be an unfair comparison. You know, to say, well, there's a carport across the street, well, it would comply. There was only one carport which, if we were looking at it afresh, wouldn't comply, and that's the one at the school.
Through the chair, I can add to that. I did an inspection of the street as well. The majority of the houses or units within that street have garages rather than carports, and the garages are set back in accordance with the planning requirement of 4 metres.
Okay. Any further questions? And we have a recommendation that the application for a carport at 34 Hopkins Street, Moona, be refused for the following reasons. One, the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause 9.4.2, P2 setbacks and building envelopes for all dwellings, which is an applicable standard. And two, the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause 9.4.2, P3 setbacks and building envelope for all dwellings, which is an applicable standard. Do I have someone to move this recommendation as a motion?
Move for discussion, Mayor.
Moved Alderman King. Someone to second? Alderman Cockshut. Alderman King.
Yeah, and this is not a reflection again on you, but I'm sad we can't not find a way to make it work. That sounds like we're trying to make things fit, but it just seems such a small concern that we have to stop this going ahead. But again, you're here to advise us, and we're here to act on your advice. So I'll leave it at that at the moment, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion? No, I agree. It does seem rather minor, and obviously, as Peter has said, he's brought it to us for procedural fairness rather than out of necessity, given the delegations planning officers have. So I'm sure the applicant appreciates that, even if we don't. It is, as Alderman King has said, we rely on the technical advice and expertise of our planning officers, and none of us like refusing applications for development, nor I think planning officers like recommending them for refusal either. I think this might be my very first recommendation for refusal in the 5 years I've been on the planning authority, in fact.
I've had a few.
You've had a few in your time, so yes, very, very difficult. Noting though there was a representation received, so obviously this, there is some level of, I guess, appreciation for the landscape, for want of a better term, or the compatibility and consistency of a use of property along that particular section of Hopkins Street. So acknowledge and appreciate that as well. I feel like the argument presented by our planning officer that has led to the recommendation to refuse the application is sound, and therefore I'm inclined to support the refusal of the application.
Right, just make a comment as well.
Actually, yes.
Just in that, I hope, hopefully, the applicant, potentially reconsider the adjustments, perhaps the size, perhaps the complete design, not having a gable roof, which then goes above the code. So, on its merits, I think, unfortunately, I'd have to go with the recommendation. But I'd like to see it here again, if that makes sense, to be able to get, to be approved, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Or approved on delegation.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further discussion? No, go back to the mover, Alderman King.
Thank you, Mayor. Peter, again, thank you for talking to the applicant and going through with them, and I'm comfortable that you would have given them all the information that was available and the advice, appropriate advice. Wish it was another way, you know, that's the emotions of this, wish it was another way, but I accept the situation as it is, so.
Thank you, Alderman King. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. Trevor, over to you again.
Yes, through the chair, the Glenorchy Planning Authority has resolved to refuse this application. As a result, advice will be provided to the applicant, advising that the application has been refused and the grounds, which are the grounds listed in the report. The applicant will have the ability to appeal to the Tasmanian Administrative and Civil Tribunal if they're dissatisfied with the outcome.
Thank you, Trevor. Moving on to item 10, proposed use and development food premises, 79 Charles Street, Moona. And our planning officer is Imogen. Is Imogen online or?
No, Imogen has moved on. Through the chair.
Sounds tragic.
So Imogen has accepted the position with Clarence Council and our last vote was Friday. So I'm presenting this one on her behalf today. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, this one here, it's an application for a food premises, in particular a takeaway food premises. The site is a little bit hard to see on that one there. It's right in the middle. It's on the eastern side of Charles Street and it's approximately midway between Springfield Avenue and Amy Street. We'll zoom in a little bit closer. We can see that it's one of 5 strata lots on a property. It's that rectangle towards the street there. The other strata properties there are units, multiple units that are joined. And to the rear of the property there are car spaces for each of the units. My understanding is that the front was actually occupied by, I believe, a commercial building or a residence. I'm not quite sure, but it was destroyed by fire many years ago, so the site is currently vacant. Moving forward, this is the site as it exists today. You can see in the background there one of the existing units that form part of the larger property that, as I said, is divided into strata lots. The site as it currently exists is occupied by a food van, and that food van is operating under a planning permit that was issued, I think, 2 or 3 years ago at this stage. The land in the general vicinity is predominantly light industrial, certainly on the southern and the western side of the site here, which is across the road on the southern side of Charles Street. It's almost entirely light industrial. Moving back from the site towards where this photo was taken on the northern side, it's light industrial. And if we look in the background, if you see there on that photo, there's a sign that says Hander. The site is immediately behind that sign, and just past that are three detached residential dwellings. To the north of, and they're to the north of the site. And as I mentioned already, to the rear of the site, where this application has been lodged, is also multiple units. The thing about the site and its surrounds is that, sorry, that's the units at the rear of the subject site. If I want to have a look at those. The site and its surrounds is actually included in the light industrial zone. So where we have those existing residences to the north on the eastern side of Charles Street, they're actually included in the light industrial zone. Also, the units as part of the strata development are included in the light industrial zone, and some detached residences, I guess you'd say more to the northeast of the site, they're actually located in Maxwell Street, for all included in a commercial zone. Now, that becomes significant when we consider the assessment of this application, because ordinarily where there are residential uses, there's a requirement to address noise impacts and also to address hours of operation. And the planning scheme includes acceptable solutions that deal with those matters. But where we have existing residences that are located in other than a residential zone, such as we have here, those provisions are not there. Those provisions don't exist within the light industrial zone. So what we don't have for properties within other than residential zones is protection in the planning scheme in respect of noise and in respect of hours of operation. The requirements are that if there's land that's within 50 metres of the site, that's in a residential zone, then those factors come into play. In this instance here, in Burrows Avenue, there are properties in the inner residential zone. However, those properties are more than 50 metres from the subject site. So that's important, because what it means is when we assess this application, even though there are residential uses immediately behind and adjoining to the north, we don't have anything in the planning scheme in order to look at noise and hours of operation. The proposed development is, as I said, the site of an existing food van. What is proposed here is to construct a two-level premises with a takeaway shop on the ground floor and 4 car parking spaces on the surface as well. On the first floor, there are some storage areas, a meeting room and some staff facilities. Two-level building, yeah, I'll run through that there. In terms of discretion, there's an indication of the elevation of the building. And that top view there, which is indicated as being southwest elevation, that's the view from the street. The one below that is the view from the driveway immediately to the north of the property that accesses the 4 units. The northeast elevation is the rear of the property, and the northwest is looking at it from the other side, facing back towards the adjoining industrial development. In terms of discretions, the food services use class is actually a discretionary use within the light industrial zone. And the discretion we're considering there is whether the use does or does not compromise the use or development of surrounding properties for industrial activities, has minimal and manages off-site impacts having regard to the characteristics of the site, the size and scale of the proposed use, and the function of the industrial area. In undertaking the assessment, it was determined that that requirement was actually satisfied, that what is being proposed here does not compromise the use or development of surrounding properties for industrial activities. It's quite a small scale, it's takeaway food use, and the nature of the building is such that if that takeaway food use was to cease at some time in the future, it could be readapted to some other use that would be more consistent with the light industrial zoning. The second discretion relates to the number of car parking spaces. The assessment concluded that a total of 6 car parking spaces are required, and the development proposes to provide 4, which is a shortfall of 2 spaces. A traffic impact assessment was provided with the application, and that assessment did draw attention to the availability of on-street parking in Charles Street. I guess the other thing that's relevant there that was referred to in that assessment is that this premises will operate from midday until midnight, and the peak period in the evening when people would be travelling there to get takeaway food would coincide with the time of the day when the majority of the light industrial premises in Charles Street wouldn't be operating, so there would be ample parking available on the street at that time. In terms of representations, there was one representation, and it was in the form of a petition with 11 signatures. The fact that the petition was received is the only reason this application is coming to the GPA for determination. What did happen though is that after the report was written and it was included in the agenda, we received a request to withdraw the petition. And so therefore, we don't have a petition to consider, but we still have a representation where they raise certain matters. As that was addressed in the planner's report, I think it's worthwhile running through those just to see what was raised. The matters raised predominantly seem to relate to the impact of the current operation of the food van on the site, and particular noise and the parking of customers' vehicles associated with that use. And the hours of operation, there was a view that they should be limited to 10 p.m. Now, what I've indicated here earlier in this presentation is that noise is not something we can take into account, nor is a restriction of the hours of operation something that's open to us under the planning scheme. In response to those, I'd say the residents, as I've said here, residents closest to the proposed use are not within a residential zone. There are no provisions to regulate those issues. And the traffic impact assessment did indicate that there would be adequate parking available in the vicinity. So the recommendation here is that the proposed use of development is compliant with the planning scheme, and the recommendation is that the application be approved.
Thank you, Trevor. Any questions for Trevor?
Yes.
Alderman Yaxley.
Do we know why the petition was removed? Was there a reason given, or was it just, I guess it doesn't really matter, but yeah, it just seems odd that we've gone so far.
Yeah, through the chair, maybe the director could comment on that because he had some discussions with the petitioner and would be aware of those issues.
Director Rao?
The petitioner, the main petitioner, I called and had a discussion with to make him aware that a petition would be tabled in open council, whereas a representation would not be, like the names and addresses would be withheld. He initially was okay with that and still wanted to progress the petition, but then called the following week and said that they'd thought about it and actually didn't want to progress the petition. However, they still wanted it to stand as a representation, which it has.
Yep.
He did ask what benefit would there be in it being a petition. Was there any additional benefit? And when I explained that there's no additional benefit, he gets the same outcomes through a representation, then he was comfortable to actually withdraw the petition.
Yep. All right.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions, Alderman Yaxley?
No, not this moment.
Any further questions? No. I have a few. When you said before, Trevor, the units, there's not any residential dwellings within 50 metres of the subject site. Well, aren't they units directly behind the subject site?
Yeah, through the chair, the provisions talk about not whether there's residential dwellings within 50 metres, but whether there's land in a residential zone within 50 metres. So what that means is that any existing residential dwellings within 50 metres that are in other than a residential zone, like a light industrial zone or a commercial zone, are actually, I guess, afforded a lesser level of amenity than residential properties within a residential zone. And if we look at the reason for that, that would be because where you've got land in a light industrial zone or a commercial zone, you're wanting to see that land develop for its full potential under that zoning. And if we had to impose restrictions based on land within a residential zone, that would work to the detriment of people who own industrial zone land and wanted to develop that land for light industrial purposes.
Got it, yeah. No, that makes sense. It's bad luck for the people who live behind, really. So the parking shortfall, I know you talked about the idea that, or the traffic impact assessment said, a traffic impact statement was provided which suggests there is ample curbside parking at all hours of the day, which made me laugh because I don't know if whoever did the traffic impact assessment has ever driven up Charles Street or down Charles Street during the day, but I wouldn't say there's ample curbside parking. It's nearly like a one-way street because there's cars chock-a-block on both sides of the road. So where does that traffic impact statement come from, and how long ago was it done?
Through the chair, I'm wondering if our development engineer might have some further information on that.
Yep, sure, Trevor. So I guess when we look at addressing the shortfall, the traffic impact statement or assessment, we're looking at a few things like, are there potential on-street parking spaces available for this particular development? If we're thinking about 2 parking spaces shortfall, it would be, I guess, I appreciate that that's the busy street. Myself, and I certainly understand that, but it would be sort of unusual if you cannot find just the 1 parking space or 2 parking spaces for any particular time frame, and that where it's coming from. And it's also address other, assess other factors as well, as in the use of that place and the targeted customer, also the the availability of the public transport, or the target customers within walking distance and things like that. So it's quite. But if you go back to that photo as well, though being a busy street, you can still find at least a few spots there. And given that the nature of the development or the use won't be like an all day occupying that, I think the on-street parking is occupied by a lot of people that are usually working there or living there.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of. Thank you, Bree. So when you say it won't be used all day, so the hours of operating hours are proposed to be 12 a.m. to 12 noon.
So I mean, I meant by the same customer, if you like.
Yeah. So, but Trevor, did you mention that it's only an evening takeaway, or is it?
Through the chair, while there are no hours or restriction on hours in this zone, the applicant has indicated in the application the hours of operation will be from midday until midnight. And so therefore, because that is what they have applied for, that's what the approval will allow. So it'll be catering to lunch, I would say, and to dinner.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it will be takeaway, but it does talk about a dining area. So will it be we don't know.
Through the chair, it's described as predominantly takeaway. If we have a look at the site plan there.
So if I may, it's Trevor, it's a takeaway shop.
Yes.
They're not proposing any seating or dining.
Yeah, through the chair, I can clarify that. If we look at the ground floor plan there, there's a serving counter within the takeaway shop and a preparation area to the rear. There's no provision in that design for dining on the premises, either within the building or in an outdoor area. It's have to say the entirety of the outdoor area is taken up by manoeuvring and parking. That plan.
Alderman Cockshutt?
In regards to the operating hours, you said 12 noon to midnight. If the applicant wanted to go 9 till 5, whatever hours I wanted to do, what's the process there?
Through the chair, I believe they would have to make another application if they wanted to do that, because it would fall outside the scope of a minor amendment.
Okay.
In one sense, there are no restrictions on the hours of operation, but the applicant has basically constrained themselves by indicating which hours they wish to operate. And a principle is that you can only get approval for what you apply for.
So if we approve this today and they 3 months down the track, change our mind, we're not going to do dinner service, we're going to focus on breakfast and lunchtime, we're going to open 7 a.m. till 3 o'clock, whatever. they'd have to come back through to GPA and not stop trading, or what's the go?
Through the chair, it would be unlikely it would come to the GPA because this one only came because the fact that there was a petition lodged, which is a fairly unusual reason for something to come to a GPA.
Sure.
The
You'd have to come
development,
back to council.
if a permit is issued today for this development here, then they can act on this permit and actually construct this building on the site and
Sure.
operate it. A further application, which was really just to vary the hours, we would really only be looking at that aspect of it because all of the other aspects are actually covered off by this permit here.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
it'd be a fairly, it would be a new application, but it would be a fairly limited assessment.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. And I guess we did say that it was 6 car spaces, but because of the on-street car parking, that kind of offsets that basically.
Yes, through the chair, the requirement is 6 spaces and they're proposing 4. The planning scheme does provide that other factors can be taken into account to justify the existence of a shortfall. And one of those factors is the availability of on-street parking within what's considered a reasonable walking distance of the site.
Yeah.
So it's not that they would get a place immediately out the front. It's assumed that someone would park 25, 40, 50 metres up the street and walk back if they needed to do that.
Yep. Thank you.
Alderman Quick?
Do we know the current operating hours of the food van?
Through the chair, we would know, but I don't know them off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
So he theoretically, he could be operating from noon till midnight with the food van now?
Through the chair, that's quite possible, yes. That is quite possible. And I guess through the chair, the impacts of this being occurring within a shop, within an actual building, I think would be much less than the food van that's actually open. With open doors and things.
Thank you. Any further questions? Alderman King?
Thank you, Chair. So again, had it not been for the petition, we wouldn't be having this discussion, right?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yes. So in reality, there's not much to be concerned about from your perspective. My only concern in the whole thing is the Mayor's question about parking. Having driven Charles Street regularly, often, I've been frightened at the thought of parking there. Just where do you find a park? But nevertheless, if you feel there's parking there, additional parking, I guess the concern, would be more for the business than anything, because I can't imagine people walking too far. But that's their choice. And 4 parking spots, how many parking spots are there now?
Through the chair, I believe it'll be 3 or 4 at the moment, but they're more informal.
That's what I thought. Looking at the picture, it didn't look very
It's more informal.
formally set out.
Through the chair, those photos in the presentation, I took them around lunchtime today, and I believe there were 3 or 4 cars parked there at the time.
Is that food van open then? Did you get your lunch?
Yes, it was open.
Is it any good?
I believe it is. I believe it is, yes. It's popular.
Not something we can consider
All
in
right.
deciding this application.
I just wanted to know.
Don't try it.
Through the chair, I have heard anecdotally that the food is very good.
Anecdotally, that's great.
Okay.
Well done.
Let's stick with our agenda here. So, any more questions? Alderman Yak?
Sorry to harp on this. I just wanted to make it a point as well. It's just Charles Street is super busy.
Yes.
And when you've got 2 cars alongside and one has to stop to allow them, it is busy. Just the parking, I'm just trying to work out exactly where it is. So there's 2 at the front, 1 just to the side, and then another one around the back.
That's correct, yes.
And so customers wouldn't necessarily use the one around the back?
I believe that's the case.
Yeah, so they won't use the one at the back?
No.
Yeah, okay.
I would believe that would be how it would.
By the time you get staff parking there.
Yes, yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay. There's no more questions. I have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of a food premises at 79 Charles Street, Moona, subject to the 9 conditions outlined in our paper here, which I note one is that no signage is approved by this permit as well, so I assume they know that they'd have to apply for another permit for signage.
Yes, through the chair, the application that came in didn't indicate any signage on any of the drawings, so felt it was useful to make it absolutely clear that we weren't approving signage.
Do they need approval for anything below 4 square metres? Or is it only above 4 square metres they need approval for sign?
Through the chair, I'm not sure of the actual threshold, but I would expect that they will come back at some time in the future with an application for signage.
Okay, so do we have someone to move that recommendation? Alderman Quick, someone to second? Alderman Cocksharp? Alderman Quick?
No,
No discussion?
no, happy.
Happy?
Rather a permanent building than a food van.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Good to see more business coming into Glenorchy, so it's good to see.
Thank you, Alderman Cocksharp. Any further discussion?
I look forward to trying it. There you go.
Yes, well, I note the concerns of the representatives and would like to note that the Planning Authority has received a full copy of the petition with the signatories' identities redacted. So in case the representatives out there are tuning in online, please be assured we have received and noted the concerns you raise, and we have considered the Planning Officer's response to those representations. And taking them into account in our debate and decision making this afternoon. I think some of the concerns that have been raised perhaps are some environmental health concerns that could perhaps be alleviated by having a building as opposed to a food truck. So I think that would probably be a positive thing. I note the concern around opening hours, but as Trevor has made quite clear, within the light industrial zone, we have no discretion over conditions on operating hours. So that's not something we can regulate on in deciding this application tonight. Parking, obviously you've heard our concerns about parking. I think a lot of restaurants or takeaway style restaurants like this do a lot of Uber Eats these days too, which doesn't necessarily mean a lot of people are going needing to park, although Ubers need to park to collect food. So I do still hold concern about potential parking issues along that particular strip. I'm not sure they'll be any worse than they already are though, given there is already a food truck there operating there, and that is permitted at the moment. So whilst we note the concerns and share some of them, we have been convinced by our planning officer's recommendations, and they are the experts here, that the two discretions, when we have the two discretions to consider, have been met. They do meet the performance criteria, and under the legislation that we assess this particular application, we are really bound to approve it. So I will support the recommendation. Any further discussion? Go back to the mover, Alderman Quick, to close debate.
No.
Nothing further. I will put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. And for a final time this evening, Trevor, over to you.
Yes, the Glenorchy Planning Authority has approved the application and a permit will be issued. That permit will be issued to the applicant and the representative, both of whom will have the ability to appeal to TASCAT if they're dissatisfied with the decision. If no appeal is made, the applicant will be able to act on the permit.
Thank you, Trevor. That brings an end to our Planning Authority meeting on Monday, 23rd of January 2023. Thank you to my fellow Planning Authority members. That was a bit of a marathon effort for a planning meeting, so thank you for your contribution. Thank you to the planning officers, as always, for your thorough presentation and reports, and to all of the other staff involved, environmental health and engineering. It takes a team effort. We do appreciate your efforts. Thank you to members of the public who joined us in the chambers this evening, and to those who joined us online. We will see you next Monday night, hopefully for our council meeting, Monday afternoon, I should say, at 3:30 p.m. here in council chambers and live streamed to Facebook. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Here you close at 5:51.
We've started.